You ever get fined for sitting on your own porch, playing music you grew up on? The first thing I noticed wasn't the flashing lights. It was the way the guitar cut off mid-note, like someone had pulled the plug on a memory. The hum of my old speaker faded into silence, replaced by the crunch of tires on gravel and that low, steady idle of a patrol car sitting just outside my driveway. I set my beer down on the wooden railing, the condensation leaving a dark ring I'd probably forget to wipe off later, and stepped toward the edge of the porch. Two officers, one hand resting casually on his belt, the other holding a notepad like he'd done this 1,000 times before. "Evening, sir. We've had a complaint about excessive noise." I actually laughed. Not loud, just enough to taste the irony sitting heavy in the summer air. It was 7:42 p.m. I knew that because the sun was still hanging low over the tree line, casting that golden light across the yard my dad used to call God's filter. And the volume? Barely louder than a conversation. Country music. Old stuff. The kind that sounds better with a little dust in the air and a cold drink in your hand. I nodded, kept my voice steady. "City ordinance says I'm good until 10 p.m. The older officer gave a small shrug, like he already knew that. "We're just responding to a call." And that's when I saw her, standing across the street, arms crossed, phone still in her hand like she'd just pressed send on something important. Brenda Whitmore, HOA president, white linen outfit, perfectly pressed, not a single hair out of place, watching the whole thing unfold like it was part of her evening entertainment. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. The air smelled faintly like fresh-cut grass and something sharper underneath. Her perfume drifting across the street, expensive enough to announce her presence before she even spoke. I could feel the wood of the porch under my boots, worn smooth from years of use, grounding me while everything else felt off. This wasn't about noise. It never was. I'd only been in Willowbrook Estates for 3 months, just long enough to realize people here didn't say what they meant. They filed complaints. They sent letters. They smiled while they measured your grass with a ruler. And Brenda? She didn't like variables. Guys like me. Work boots, calloused hands. A pickup that actually hauled things. We didn't fit her version of community standards. The officer handed me a slip of paper. "No citation tonight. Just a warning." I took it, felt the texture between my fingers, thin and official and completely unnecessary. "Appreciate it," I said. They left. Just like that. Engine fading. Gravel settling. Silence creeping back in where the music used to be. Across the street, Brenda lowered her phone slowly, like she was savoring the moment. That same smile still there. Controlled. Certain. Like she'd just set something in motion. I picked up my beer, took a slow sip, and looked down at that warning notice again. The ink hadn't even dried all the way. That's when I noticed the time stamp on the complaint. Filed at 7:41 p.m., exactly 1 minute before the officers arrived. Funny thing about that, I hadn't even turned the music on until 7:40. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't about noise complaints. This was about paperwork. And Brenda had just made her first mistake. I did not turn the music back on that night. Not because I could not, but because I wanted to hear something else instead. Silence has a way of revealing things noise never can. The crickets picked up where the speakers left off, a steady rhythm in the grass. And somewhere down the block a garage door groaned shut like it had been doing that same tired job for 20 years. I stayed on the porch longer than usual, letting the wood cool under my boots, replaying that moment in my head. 7:41. Complaint filed. 7:42. Police at my driveway. That kind of timing is not coincidence. That is planning. The next morning, the air smelled like fresh coffee and cut pine from the fence line behind my yard. I sat at the small table by the window, laptop open, that warning slip laid flat beside it like evidence waiting to be understood. I typed in the city noise ordinance first. Section, subsection, decibel limits, permitted hours. I read every line twice. Then I checked the county version, then the HOA bylaws. That last one took longer. 57 pages of carefully worded control disguised as community standards. Paint colors, fence heights, approved mailbox fonts. But noise? Nothing that overruled city law. Not a single line giving them authority to fine someone for sound within legal hours. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking softly, and felt that slow, familiar shift in my chest. The same one I used to get when a job did not add up, when a machine made a sound it was not supposed to make. Something was off, and now I knew exactly where to look. Around 9, I stepped outside to grab the mail. The sun was already warming the concrete, that dry heat rising in waves you could almost see if you stood still long enough. And there it was, a white envelope, thicker than the usual junk, stamped with the HOA logo like it meant something. I tore it open right there by the mailbox. The paper inside was heavy, expensive, the kind that tries to impress you before you even read the words. Notice of violation. $2,500 fine. Reason: excessive noise disturbance impacting community peace. I actually smiled this time. Not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything. She did not wait. She did not investigate. She did not even pretend to follow a process. She saw something she did not like, and she acted like she had the authority to punish it. Across the street, I could feel it before I saw it. That same presence. Brenda is standing in her driveway, sunglasses on, coffee mug in hand, watching me read that letter like she was waiting for a reaction. The morning light caught the side of her face, sharp and controlled, every detail exactly where she wanted it. I looked up, held the paper just slightly higher, enough for her to know I had seen it. Her lips curled into that same tight smile, the one that said she believed this was already over, that I would pay it, keep my head down, and learn my place. The breeze shifted, carrying the faint scent of her perfume across the street again, mixing with the smell of hot asphalt and cut grass. I folded the letter carefully, slower than necessary, and slipped it back into the envelope. Not anger, not frustration, just clarity. Because now it was not about music anymore. It was about a paper trail. And Brenda Whitmore had just signed her name to the first piece of it. By noon, the heat had settled in like it owned the place, baking the driveway until the air shimmered just above the concrete. And I was already 3 documents deep into something Brenda probably never expected me to read. The HOA bylaws sat open on my screen, every clause highlighted, every vague phrase circled in my mind like a loose bolt waiting to snap. I could still feel the weight of that letter in my hand, that expensive paper pretending to be authority, but the more I read, the thinner it started to feel. There is a difference between rules and power, and Brenda was counting on nobody knowing where that line actually is. I pulled up the county clerk database next, fingers tapping slow and deliberate, the soft hum of my laptop filling the kitchen like background noise you stop noticing after a while. Filing procedures. Notice requirements. Due process for fines. It was all there, buried under layers of legal language that most people never bother to look at. But I have spent most of my life fixing things people ignore until they break, and this felt exactly the same. You do not panic. You trace the system. You find the failure point. Around 1:30, I stepped back onto the porch, not to play music, just to sit. The wood was warmer now, sun-soaked, the faint scent of pine mixing with the dry smell of summer dust. Across the street, Brenda's car was gone, but her house still felt present. Like everything about it was staged, controlled, waiting. I leaned back in the chair, letting it creak under my weight, and started putting the pieces together. Complaint filed before the music could even be considered excessive. Police called immediately. Fine issued less than 12 hours later. No hearing. No warning period. No verification. That is not enforcement. That is targeting. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling back through the previous night. Timestamps. Messages. Even the exact moment I turned the speaker on, logged. Automatically by the app. 7:40 p.m. music started. 7:41 p.m. complaint filed. That 1-minute gap sat there on the screen like a fingerprint. And then something else clicked. I opened the HOA portal, the one they use to submit complaints and track violations. It took a few minutes to navigate, the interface clunky, designed more for control than clarity. But eventually I found it. Complaint history. Anonymous submissions. Time logs. There were 4 entries tied to my address in the last 24 hours. 4. All filed within a 12-minute window. All marked as separate neighbors reporting the same issue. I felt that shift again, sharper this time. Not frustration. Not even anger. Just that clean, precise certainty that comes when a problem finally shows its full shape. People do not coordinate complaints like that. Not over low-volume music before 8 p.m. But one person with access? One person who understands the system well enough to use it as a tool? That is different. I could almost hear her voice from the night before, calm and measured, wrapped in that artificial politeness she wore like a uniform. Community standards. The words sounded hollow now, because standards require consistency. And this was something else entirely. I stood up slowly, the chair legs scraping lightly against the porch boards, and looked across the street again. The curtains in her front window shifted just slightly, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. And I nodded to myself, once, like sealing an agreement nobody else could hear. Because at that point, it stopped being about whether I was right. It started being about proving she knew she was wrong. And the best part about people who rely on control instead of rules, they always leave a trail. You just have to be patient enough to follow it. By late afternoon, the neighborhood settled into that quiet routine people like Brenda mistake for control, the kind where every lawn looks identical and every driveway feels staged. But I knew better now, because once you see the cracks in a system, you cannot unsee them. I brought the speaker back out onto the porch, set it down in the exact same spot as the night before, the rubber feet pressing into the wood like they belonged there, and I did not turn it on right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch, thick and deliberate, the distant hum of a lawn mower 2 houses down blending with the soft rustle of leaves overhead. Timing matters. That was something I learned a long time ago. Not just in work, but in people. You give them enough space, they show you exactly who they are. At precisely 7:40, I tapped the screen on my phone and let the music start again. Same song, same volume. The low twang of guitar rolled out across the porch, steady and calm, not trying to be heard beyond what was reasonable. I set my phone face up on the table, recording everything. Timestamp visible. Audio level steady. Evidence does not need to be loud. It just needs to be clear. The air felt warmer than the night before, a dry heat that clung to your skin, carrying the faint smell of barbecue from somewhere down the block, mixed with the sharper scent of fresh cut grass. I took a seat, leaned back, and waited. It did not take long. 7:41. My phone buzzed softly against the table. Notification. HOA portal update. Another complaint filed. I did not even have to open it to know what it said. 7:42. Headlights rolled slowly past the end of my driveway, not stopping this time. Just a casual pass like someone checking a box. Different approach. Same intent. I glanced across the street. Brenda was already outside, standing near her mailbox, pretending to sort through envelopes she had no interest in reading. Her posture was too still, too aware. She was watching without looking like she was watching. That is the thing about control. It always needs an audience. I let the song play through, did not move, did not react. The chair creaked softly every time I shifted my weight, the wood warm beneath my arms, grounding me in the moment while everything else played out exactly as expected. 7:43. Another notification. Second complaint. Same format. Same language. Filed by a different neighbor. I could almost see it in my head now, her sitting at that desk inside, logging into the system again and again, changing just enough details to make it look legitimate, never realizing that repetition is what gives it away. I reached for my drink, the glass cool against my fingers, and took a slow sip, letting the taste settle while the music carried on like nothing was wrong. Because nothing was. Not legally. Not factually. Only on paper. And that paper was starting to look very interesting. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the yard, and by the time the song ended, I had 3 new complaints logged against me in less than 5 minutes. 3 separate entries. 3 identical time frames. 3 pieces of evidence that no one else in this neighborhood would ever think to question. Except me. I tapped the screen, stopped the recording, and saved the file with a simple label. Date. Time. Location. The kind of detail that holds up when someone tries to argue against it. Across the street, Brenda finally looked up, just for a second, her eyes meeting mine before she masked it with that same controlled expression. She thought she was building a case. That is what made this almost impressive. The effort, the consistency, the confidence. But she was not building a case. She was building a pattern. And patterns are exactly what break people like her. The next morning started quieter, but it did not feel peaceful anymore. It felt measured. Every sound had weight to it now. The drip of the coffee maker. The faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Even the soft scrape of the chair as I pulled it out sounded sharper, like the house itself was paying attention. I set my phone down on the table, opened the recordings from the night before, and played them back one by one. The guitar came through clean, steady, nowhere near excessive. Underneath it, You could hear everything else too. Crickets, wind, a car passing 2 streets over. Real sound, natural sound, nothing that would justify what she claimed. I skipped to the timestamps. 7:41, 7:42, 7:43. Complaint after complaint, lined up like someone had been hitting refresh and submit over and over again. The pattern was not just obvious. It was undeniable. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, and started building something that looked less like a defense and more like a case. Screenshot after screenshot. Time logs. Audio files. Even the HOA portal entries. Each one saved with the exact submission time. I labeled everything carefully, the way you do when you know someone else is going to have to read it later. Because this was not staying between me and Brenda. Not anymore. Around 10, I stepped outside to check the mailbox again, more out of routine than expectation, but there it was. Another envelope. Same logo. Same thick paper. This time the fine had doubled. $5,000. Repeated violation. Escalation due to noncompliance. I let out a slow breath, the kind that steadies you instead of rattling you. The sun was already higher, the heat starting to press down again, and across the street Brenda was exactly where I expected her to be. Standing near the edge of her driveway, talking to someone I had not seen before. Mid-50s, neatly dressed, clipboard in hand. They both stopped for just a second when I pulled the letter out. Not long enough to be obvious, just enough to register. I could hear pieces of their conversation drift across the street. Words like standards and process and necessary enforcement. It all sounded official if you did not listen too closely. But I had already listened close enough. I held the letter up slightly, just like the day before, not for drama, just to make sure she knew I had it. Her expression did not change much, but there was something tighter around her eyes now. Not doubt, not yet, but pressure, because she was not dealing with someone who would fold. She was dealing with someone who was documenting. I turned back toward the house, the gravel crunching under my boots, and felt that same clarity settle in again. The kind that makes everything simple. Not easy, just simple. This was no longer about stopping her. It was about letting her continue. Every complaint she filed, every fine she issued, every step she took thinking she was building authority was actually adding to something else entirely. I set the new letter down next to the others on the table, lined them up in order, and looked at them for a second. The paper, the ink, the wording. All of it looked official. All of it felt heavy. But underneath that, it was just a record. And records can be turned. I opened my laptop again, pulled up a different page this time. County Civil Court filing procedures. Small claims thresholds. Harassment statutes. Abuse of authority definitions. The language was dry, technical, precise. But it said everything I needed it to say. I scrolled slowly, taking it in, matching it piece by piece with what I already had. Because the truth was, Brenda thought she was forcing me into a corner. But corners only matter if you stay in them. And I was already looking at the door. By mid-afternoon, the house felt different, like it had shifted from a place to live into a place to work. Every surface holding a purpose now. Every object part of something larger than it looked. The stack of letters sat on the table in a clean line, edges perfectly aligned. Each one a step Brenda thought was pushing me back, but was actually pulling her forward into something she could not see yet. I sat down, opened my laptop again, and started turning all of it into structure. Not just files, not just screenshots, a timeline. That is what makes things real when you take them outside your own walls. Time, sequence, intent. I dragged each piece into place. 7:40 p.m. music starts. 7:41 p.m. complaint filed. 7:42 p.m. police arrive. 3 additional complaints within 12 minutes. Next morning, fine issued. Following day, fine escalated. Every entry backed by a timestamp. Every claim matched against actual ordinance language. The more I built it out, the clearer it became. This was not random. It was systematic. I could hear the soft click of the keyboard under my fingers, steady and deliberate, like tightening bolts one by one until the entire frame holds together. Around 3 o'clock, I printed everything. The printer hummed in the corner, feeding out page after page, the smell of warm ink filling the room, sharp and almost metallic. There is something about seeing it on paper that changes things. Screens can be dismissed. Paper gets taken. Seriously, I gathered the pages, tapped them against the table to square them up, and clipped them together. Clean. Organized. Ready. Outside. The heat had started to break just slightly, a faint breeze moving through the yard, carrying that dry summer smell that settles into everything this time of year. I stepped out onto the porch again, not to wait this time, but to move forward. Across the street, Brenda's car was back, parked at the same angle as always, like even that had a rule attached to it. Her front door opened just as I reached the bottom step. Timing again. She stepped out, phone in hand, expression already set before she even looked up. Controlled. Expecting something. Maybe even hoping for it. I walked halfway down the driveway and stopped, not crossing the street, not closing the distance more than necessary. No reason to. This was not about confrontation. It was about clarity. She looked up finally, eyes meeting mine, that same practiced smile starting to form. "Mr. Cole," she called out, voice smooth, measured, like she was addressing a problem she already believed she had solved. I held up the stack of papers slightly, not waving them, just enough for her to see. "You missed a step," I said. Not loud, not aggressive, just factual. Her smile paused for half a second, just enough to show it was not natural. "Excuse me," she replied, tone tightening just a fraction. I could feel the breeze shift again, brushing across the porch behind me, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and something sharper underneath, like tension settling into the air. "Due process," I said. "You cannot skip it." The words hung there for a moment, simple but heavy, because they were not an opinion. They were a rule. The kind she pretended to enforce but clearly did not understand. Her posture straightened, shoulders pulling back slightly, that defensive edge starting to show beneath the surface polish. "The HOA has full authority to maintain community standards," she said, each word placed carefully, like she had said it enough times to believe it. I nodded once. "Then you should read your own bylaws again." I did not wait for a response. Did not need one. I turned, walked back up the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots, steady and grounded, and stepped onto the porch again. Because the conversation was not the point. The record was. And now she knew I was keeping one. The sun dropped slower that evening, like it was stretching the day on purpose, dragging every shadow across the yard until the whole neighborhood looked longer, quieter, and just a little more exposed. I did not turn the music on right away this time either. Instead, I set everything up with intention. Phone on the table, camera angled just enough to catch the porch, the street, and the edge of Brenda's driveway. Not obvious, just thorough. The speaker sat exactly where it had been the past 2 nights, the same scuff marks on the wood lining up perfectly beneath it. Consistency matters when you are building something that has to hold under pressure. The air carried that familiar mix again. Warm grass, distant barbecue smoke, and something else now. Anticipation. At exactly 7:40, I pressed play. The guitar rolled out smooth, steady, the same song, the same volume, the same controlled presence that had somehow become a problem on paper. I leaned back in the chair, let it creak under me, and kept my eyes forward, not across the street, not at the windows, just straight ahead. You do not chase reaction. You let it come to you. 7:41. No notification. That was new. I felt it immediately. That slight shift in rhythm, like a machine that suddenly stops making the noise you were expecting. 7:42. Still nothing. The breeze moved through the yard, lighter now, brushing against the porch railing, carrying the soft rustle of leaves. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then stopped. Normal sounds. Real sounds. I picked up my phone slowly, not breaking the motion of the moment, and checked the portal manually. No new complaints. That was when I looked across the street. Brenda was not outside this time. No staged presence. No phone in hand. But the curtains in her front window were not fully closed either. Just enough of a gap to watch through. I could feel it without needing to see her directly. The observation had not stopped. It had just changed form. 7:43. My phone buzzed. One notification. A single complaint. Filed later than before. Slower. Less precise. I opened it. Read the language carefully. It was different too. Less confident. More general. Possible disturbance. Not excessive noise. Not the same exact phrasing she had used before. That small change told me more than anything else had so far. Pressure had reached her. Not enough to stop, but enough to hesitate. I let the music continue, did not react, did not adjust anything. Because this was no longer about proving she was wrong in the moment. It was about showing she knew she was wrong and kept going anyway. The song ended. the last note fading into the evening air, and I let the silence sit for a few seconds before turning the speaker off completely. No rush, no tension, just control. I saved the recording again, same format, same detail, adding this night to the timeline that was already taking shape. Inside, the house felt cooler, the air conditioning humming softly as I set the phone down and added the new complaint to the file. Time logged. Language noted. Pattern updated. It was all there now, not just repetition, but deviation. And deviation is what exposes intent. I closed the laptop halfway, leaving the screen dim but still alive, and looked at the stack of papers again. It had grown thicker, heavier, not just in weight, but in meaning. Because at this point, I was not collecting incidents. I was documenting behavior. And behavior, when it is repeated and recorded, becomes something you can take somewhere else. Somewhere that does not care about her title or her tone or her version of standards. Somewhere that only cares about what can be proven. I leaned back in the chair again, the wood settling under me, and let out a slow breath that felt different from the ones before. Not tension, not frustration, just readiness. Because Brenda had not stopped. She had adjusted. And that meant she was aware now. And awareness is the first step before someone either corrects themselves or doubles down. Either way, I was ready for what came next. The next morning did not feel like a morning anymore. It felt like a deadline, the kind that sits quietly in the background while everything else moves forward like nothing is about to change. The air inside the house was cool, steady, carrying that faint scent of paper and ink from everything I had laid out the night before, every document aligned, every page labeled, every detail exactly where it needed to be. I stood there for a second, just looking at it all, not admiring it, not second-guessing it, just confirming it was complete. Because once you move something like this forward, there is no pulling it back. I picked up the stack, felt the weight settle into my hands, and slid it into a simple folder. Nothing flashy. No need for it. The strength was already in the content. Outside, the sun had barely cleared the rooftops, casting long shadows across the street, the kind that make everything look quieter than it really is. Brenda's house was still, curtains drawn tighter than usual, like she had already decided to reduce visibility, control what could be seen and what could not. That alone told me enough. People only pull back when they feel something pushing forward. I walked to the truck, the gravel shifting under my boots with that familiar crunch, and placed the folder carefully on the passenger seat. The engine turned over smooth, low, reliable, and I let it idle for a second, hands resting on the wheel, steady. This was not about emotion. It was about process. The drive into town was short, maybe 15 minutes, but it felt longer in a way that had nothing to do with distance. Every light, every turn, every mile marker just part of a sequence that was already set in motion. The courthouse sat where it always had. Plain brick, no unnecessary detail. The kind of place that does not try to impress you because it does not have to. I stepped inside, the temperature dropping immediately, that faint echo of footsteps on tile replacing the outside world with something more structured, more controlled. The clerk behind the counter did not look up right away, just finished what she was doing before meeting my eyes. Routine. Procedure. Exactly what I needed. I placed the folder down, opened it, and slid the first document forward. I need to file a civil complaint, I said, voice even, clear, no hesitation. She nodded, took the papers, and started scanning them one by one. I watched her eyes move, line by line, the subtle shifts in her expression telling me she understood what she was looking at without needing to say it out loud. Timestamps. Repeated filings. Escalating fines without due process. It was all there, clean, undeniable. You have supporting evidence? She asked. I slid the second set forward. Audio logs. Portal screenshots. Filing records. Organized, indexed, dated. Her pen paused for just a second before continuing. That was enough. That was confirmation. The filing took less than 20 minutes. Forms signed. Copies stamped. Case number assigned. Simple steps, each one locking the next into place. When it was done, she handed me my copy, the official seal pressed into the paper, sharp and final. You will be notified once it is processed, she said, tone neutral, professional. I nodded, took the documents, and stepped back outside into the heat that felt different now. Not heavier, just clearer. The drive back was quieter. Not because anything had changed yet, but because something had begun. When I pulled into the driveway, the neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had the day before. Lawns trimmed, cars parked neatly, nothing out of place. But that is the thing about change. It does not announce itself when it starts. It builds underneath, in paperwork, in records, in systems that people like Brenda rely on without fully understanding. I stepped out of the truck, closed the door with a soft, solid click, and glanced across the street. Her car was there, curtains still drawn, still watching, even if she thought she was not being seen. I held the stamped copy in my hand for a second, then lowered it, not needing to show it, not needing to say anything. Because at that point, the conversation was no longer mine to start. It was hers to answer. And this time, it would not be on her terms. 3 days later, the air shifted before anything else did, subtle but noticeable, like the pressure dropping before a storm you cannot see yet. I was back on the porch, same chair, same speaker, same place where all of this started, the wood beneath me worn just enough to feel familiar, grounding. The music played low, steady, not for anyone else, just for me, the way it was always meant to be. The sun sat just above the rooftops, casting that same golden light across the yard, but this time it felt different, not interrupted, not watched the same way. At exactly 7:42, a different sound cut through the evening. Not sirens, not tires on gravel. A single car door closing across the street. I did not turn my head right away. I let the moment settle, let the sound define itself. Then I looked. Brenda stood at the edge of her driveway, but something about her posture had changed. The stiffness was gone, replaced with something tighter, more controlled, like someone trying to hold a shape that no longer fits. In her hand was a folded document. Not one of hers. Mine. The official seal caught the light even from across the street, small but unmistakable. She took a few steps forward, stopping just short of the curb, that invisible line she had never crossed before. I lowered the volume slightly, not out of respect, but out of precision. This was not a confrontation. This was a response. "Mr. Cole," she called out, voice still smooth, but thinner now, like it had lost some of its weight. I did not stand, did not move toward her. I just turned enough to face her, one arm resting on the chair, steady. "You filed a complaint," she said, holding the paper a little higher, like saying it out loud might change what it meant. I nodded once. "I filed a record," I replied. The breeze moved between us, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and warm pavement, the same smells that had been there every night, unchanged, constant, unlike everything else. She looked down at the document for a second, eyes scanning lines she probably never expected to read about herself. "This is unnecessary," she said, but there was no certainty behind it now. Just resistance. I leaned back slightly, the chair creaking under me, that same familiar sound anchoring the moment. "So were the fines," I said. Simple, direct, nothing extra. Her fingers tightened around the paper just enough to notice, not dramatic, just real. The kind of reaction you cannot rehearse. Across the street, one of the neighboring doors opened slightly, someone stepping out onto their porch, then another. Quiet observers, drawn not by noise, but by something else. Presence. Reality. Brenda glanced around briefly, just a flicker, but it was enough. The audience she used to rely on was still there, but it was no longer hers. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, tried to pull that control back into place. "The HOA has procedures," she said, defaulting to the line that used to work. I nodded again. "Exactly," I said. "Now we are following them." The words settled heavier than anything else had been said between us. No raised voices. No tension in tone. Just clarity. She stood there for another second, then two, the paper lowering slightly in her hand as the weight of it shifted from authority to evidence. Finally, she turned, not quickly, not dramatically, just decisively, and walked back toward her house, each step measured, but different now. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. I turned the volume back up just a notch, the guitar filling the space again, smooth, uninterrupted, exactly as it had always been meant to be. The neighborhood did not change overnight. The houses stayed the same. The lawn stayed perfect. But something underneath had shifted permanently. Because control only works when nobody questions it. And the moment it gets documented, organized, and placed in the right hands, it stops being control. It becomes accountability. I leaned back, took a slow sip from the glass beside me, and let the music carry through the evening air without interruption this time. No knocks, no lights, no notifications, just the sound of something simple being exactly what it is supposed to be. And across the street, the curtains stayed closed.